Hi. Thanks, Sarah. That's great. So welcome everybody. It's great to be bringing this session to you, not only on Zoom, and we've got a lot of people in the actual session with us this morning, but also on Facebook Live. Our programme of webinars has really been a busy one all through lockdown, and I think we've chosen July just to kind of calm that down slightly, but to really focus on some of the key issues. And today's going to be a really, really interesting one. Obviously, we're bringing this to you in a week that some lucky people have already managed to get a haircut. Our kind of tourism and hospitality sector is definitely open for business, and we've seen our town centres and lots of people out and about already. So it's good that we've got that safe return to a little bit of normality, and that businesses are beginning to get those steps to kind of make sure they're now getting back face-to-face in front of their customers. The Chamber is going to continue our virtual programme for a long time, I now suspect. So when and if, and we're going to talk about events, when and if we're kind of doing face-to-face events, I'm really looking forward to that, because, you know, it's great to see people virtually, and those of you that have heard me say this before, it's no surprise I quite like a little nosy into people's houses, so that's not too bad either. But you do get slightly kind of zoomed out, don't you, with constantly just seeing people on a screen. So the sun is splitting the pavement today, so it's a very good day in Dundee and Angus for you to be out and about visiting all these tourism businesses that we're going to talk about being open. Just a little bit about the Chamber and what we've got coming up. So we've got a session next Wednesday with the Developing Young Workforce team. So that's very much about helping businesses connect with young people. They are your future workforce, and at a time when young people are going to be particularly badly hit by the current crisis and what's going to happen to their employment prospects and all sorts of issues for them, it's really important that we can help businesses be part of that conversation. So if you're interested in seeing how you can influence the next generation, how you can connect with schools and colleges about their curriculum, and how you can just get in front of young people and not only tell them about your business, but learn from young people about what kind of jobs that they would really like you to offer, then that's what that conversation will be about next week. We've also got a really interesting session just towards the end of July. We've got Phil Prentice from Scotland's Towns Partnership coming on the 30th of July to talk about the work that they're doing to support our towns. And we're also going to be talking about some Chamber of Commerce projects about looking at supporting buy local. So there's been an enormous swathe of people buying from local food producers, supporting your local restaurants, supporting those local businesses. And that's really important for jobs. So whether it's people in the Overgate Centre supporting the retailers in there who employ local people, or whether it's about supporting those people in Dundee and Angus that are kind of throwing their doors open, using their outdoor spaces. And you know, Glam's Castle have been on talking to us about how they've adapted their business model to just make sure that their visitors feel as safe as possible. That's all going to be part of that conversation with Phil on the 30th of July. And then something that people will have heard me talk about that's personally important to me is our 7 Steps to Personal Wellbeing programme. So it had a working title as a mental health programme, and I think it's definitely wider than that, but I think that's at the root of it. We've just heard so many people struggling at the moment, and whether you're a business that's been inundated through lockdown and can't cope with demand, whether you've been completely shut and you're struggling with how that's taken a toll, or whether you're kind of somewhere in between like us, we're continuing to operate, but everybody's getting a little bit fed up of working at their dining table or just not having the usual interactions that they've got. And we're running a 7 Steps programme kicking off in the middle of August, and that will be talking about subjects like growth mindset and resilience and loneliness and volunteering and how that's good for your soul and good for your community. So if you're interested in that, there will be no pressure to bare your own soul. It's about just having those conversations and actually probably celebrating how much personal resilience you've got, but actually supporting each other just along that journey. So yeah, lots of interesting things going on, and I'm really proud of the team for keeping the Chamber going in amongst all of that. So I'm going to introduce our sponsor to you today. So we work very closely with Al-Maktoum College of Further Education in Dundee. they are one of our partners and are just a brilliant community resource and do an awful lot of really good work. So they're sponsoring today and helping make sure that these kind of events actually happen. So Shireen, do you want to unmute and you can come in and say a few words, and then I'll come back on and introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you, Alison, for that introduction. My name is Shireen Mardani, and I am the Communications and Student Recruitment Officer at Al-Maktoum College of Higher Education. Now, in order to try and link the college with today's subject, you might be wondering, or if you're not familiar with the college, you might be wondering, Al-Maktoum, what does that have to do with Scottish tourism? In fact, I would argue that we play a really large role in bringing tourism to Dundee and Scotland, mainly through some of our international programs that we offer. We run these international programs two times a year, and we invite students from the UAE, Malaysia and Egypt to come and study with us for 4 weeks at a time. And during their study time in Dundee, they also get the chance to explore Scotland, see some of our great attractions, and indeed spend a lot of money in the shopping centres, locally especially. So in that sense, it's a really exciting opportunity for these girls to come across and see part of the world that they might have not been able to get a chance to visit before. And aside from these two international programs, we are a functioning college, an independently funded college, and we offer subjects such as business studies, management and leadership courses, as well as some more unique courses including Arabic language, Islamic finance and Islamic studies. And just very recently, actually, we've launched 3 new programs in Islamic finance, entrepreneurship and also sustainable development. So lots of exciting things happening at the college. And we, as well as, you know, working with young people, just leaving schools, not sure what they're going to do in their careers, we also have a focus on businesses, and especially businesses around Dundee. We offer training sessions to organisations in various different subjects as well. I know that we've worked with many charities who perhaps are working with refugees. So we've done some Arabic training with them, and I think this is a really good opportunity and something that we're quite proud to offer in and around Dundee and further afield, actually. So if you in your organisation are interested in taking part in some of these training sessions, we'd be more than happy to assist you in that. And I know that Alison and Sarah have taken part in quite a lot as well, and they've even joined us for some training sessions and led some of the international training sessions. So they really are something quite unique about the college. We offer courses at a part-time and full-time basis, as well as flexible learning. And given the current situation, we've also just started working on a blended model of teaching. So that involves some face-to-face teaching as well as more digital work online. So I think that there really is no excuse now to upskill and to take the time to learn something new. So we just, while I'm here, we do have a virtual open day coming up at the end of this month, that if you're looking to find out a bit more about the college, if you'd like to find out about some of our courses, invite some of your staff along, please do join us. All of our information is available on the college website. So if you visit almcollege.ac.uk, you'll find all the information. And just as a final note, we're all about supporting students, we're all about supporting community members, and we have just launched an initiative to support students even further by offering them a laptop along with their full-time studies. So we really think that will allow students who have particularly, you know, suffered during this time and this financial difficulty that we're now going to go through, this laptop should be able to support them during and beyond their studies. So yes, we're really looking for all types of community opportunities to support further. So if you also have any ideas about what our students might need, what you might need as professionals, please do let us know. I think that's about it from me. I'll leave the email address in the chat box if that's okay with you, Alison and Sarah, and just my email address. So please do get in touch if you have any questions.
Fab, thank you so much. So you can see that today's conversation, although it's about tourism, it actually impacts us all. And I think we've been saying that in Dundee and Angus for an awful long time, that we've been talking a lot locally about the V&A and what the V&A was going to bring to the area. And I've been saying to anybody that would listen, the V&A and tourism is everybody's business. Whether you're in business services and want to support that sector, whether you actually are actively supplying to the tourists that are going to come, or whether you want to work with some of our key anchor institutions like Glamis Castle or the V&A or Hospital Field or Scone Palace. It's just such an industry that's got such a reach, and it's just been so dramatically impacted by the coronavirus pandemic and what's happened. And when we were talking about our event today, we were talking about, not having been able to go away for short breaks. And I know already in our team and friends of mine have already made well use of the self-employed, the short stays, and the fact that actually you can get away and kind of get in and enjoy parts of Scotland. So we know people are already beginning to do that. People are now dining out. Visitor attractions are beginning to reopen. But international visitors, now that's a whole other ballgame, isn't it? So how do we restart the industry? What does the future of Scottish tourism look like? So today we've got two amazing speakers, and we'll have a really good conversation and a chance for some questions as well. So if you're on Facebook listening, please put some questions on there and we'll pick them up and try and bring them into the conversation. But I'm going to get out of the way and introduce to you our two speakers. So David Allfrey MBE recently handed over as the producer and chief executive of the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo. And Malcolm Roughead, OBE, is the Chief Executive of VisitScotland, and they're going to discuss the impacts of COVID-19 on Scottish tourism and what the future of the industry might look like. So, gentlemen, over to you. David, if you could unmute yourself, I'll let you know I can hear you, and I'll get right out of the way.
How's that? Does that work?
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to everybody. With Malcolm and I, you have the two spectrum ends of the haircut continuum. Smart, snappy military haircut, and Malcolm looking very much like a wild Scot this morning. So mine is conducted with a horse shaver, and clearly Malcolm has not got one of those. But what a privilege to be able to talk to everybody, and my experience of these webinars, a great opportunity for conversation rather than just transmissions from the speakers. So I suspect Malcolm and I will both go away having learnt as much or as more than we actually give. The structure we're going to use today is I'm going to give a sort of bit of an overview. It's a personal overview. I'm presently sort of, I think actors call themselves resting when they're out of work. That is where I am at the moment. I've had a lovely 10 years in Edinburgh looking after a wonderful event, wonderful people, and really trying to contribute to the Scottish tourism story and the events and festivals piece. So I'm going to give a little bit of a sort of overview, some of which is my own, some of which I've sort of culled from around the place. So if anyone objects to what I'm saying or thinks I'm wrong, I'm delighted to be contradicted or abused or go to sleep. But I think what it will show is that tourism is just one sort of business, and the scale of this problem affects everybody, whether you're selling a pot of jam or whether you're ordering a country. I think it affects everybody equally. So tourism is really today's example. It's got particular challenges, which Malcolm and his very talented team are already addressing quite brilliantly. So I'm going to go off the tourism script, if I may, at the beginning and just give us a bit of context. Malcolm's then going to bring us out of the strategic into the sort of the Visit Scotland piece, which is looking very particularly at Scottish tourism and how that is restarting. Brilliant moves yesterday, just really encouraging. And then I'm going to talk a little bit at the end on events and festivals in particular, which still face a real challenge in that their opening date is yet unknown. I think it's worth saying at the beginning that I think COVID and everything that it's brought with it is as close to chaos as most of us have experienced in our lifetime. And as a soldier, you're trained from very young to understand where on a spectrum of chaos a particular set of events sit. If you take on the left of arc, fishing, everything's wonderful, you have full sandwiches, a full thermos of coffee, and on the right you've got a destroyed state which has just been through a war, lots of people being killed, and clearly all the infrastructure of the state. Clearly COVID is at neither end of those, but it has created a level of global chaos, and certainly national chaos, and probably regional and local, that is unprecedented. And so my pitch today is really about trying to bring order to that chaos, how each of us can contribute individually, in our families, in our communities, in our businesses, in our agencies, in our governments, and in our countries. How can we all contribute to bringing a better order out of all of this? Now, that's not to say that everything is chaotic at the moment, because it's not. Lots and lots of very clever people are working very hard to try and bring order from this. But it has been very disruptive. For me, the other side of the risk coin is always an opportunity. And the trick is going as close to the edge of risk as you are comfortable, because that is where the greatest opportunities lie. The Chinese, I think, understood this many years ago with yin and yang, the yin being the chaos, the yang being the order, and the great trick was to try and get onto the interface of the two interlocking halves of the circle and try and get as close up to the chaos as you could with your brain, with your physicality, with your morals, and make order from it. Because out of order will come trust, will come trade, and will come business. And that's really what we're about, I think, today. So the scale of COVID, looking up last night, I understand 13.3 million people have now been recorded as having caught this disease. And I suspect that is somewhat understated, given the way people report. 7.5 million of those have recovered from it, but more than 500,000 have clearly succumbed and died from it. UK, 292,000, and we've had over 45,000 mortalities. So this is not trivial. This is really, it's up there on the scale. In Scotland, 18,368 cases last night, and 2,490 deaths from it. And Scotland's going through an extraordinary week, I hope, and hopefully a bit longer, with reported cases going down, deaths not, and fewer admissions to hospital. We've been in lockdown today for 115 days. That really is quite a lot, nearly 4 months. It's a quarter of a year. So a quarter of our budgets will have been inoperable for at least that time, I suspect. We had good opening up yesterday: hairdressers, barbers, bars, restaurants, cinemas, tourist attraction places of worship, and childcare. All of that was great, and you could sort of feel that over the social media last night, the sort of optimism that everyone was feeling. But our governments collectively have put in a great deal of money into this. 192 billion is the publicly quoted figure of various concessions and taxes and so forth. I'm talking to one of my mates in the city last night. I'm told the actual number is nearer 400 billion. And that is as much applied to the economy in 1 quarter as was applied to the whole of the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. So effectively, a quarter of a year's support against 2 years of support over that financial crisis. So that's huge. And I suggest the solution to that is not going to come from government. It's going to come from each and every one of us pulling in a pretty unified direction. We all have a part to play. And although we will sit in our kitchens and our sitting rooms and grizzle about what we're being told, ultimately, much of the solution will be found at our own kitchen tables, I suspect. And I think that's really, really important. We've had a very tough time politically in all of this. Nobody would, I think, disagree with me when I suggest that the relationship between Whitehall and the devolved administrations has been cheeky from time to time, and that the communication of measures in a unitary fashion has been really quite challenging. And if I were to offer an opinion, it is that unity of purpose across all our governments that I think is so important, because I know from my own part of the world, when people get a message that is not quite clear, that increases the risk of them doing something and they are less inclined to do it. And I think many people around the United Kingdom are uncertain of what sort of welcome they might receive in Scotland. I think that's something important that we have to do. So we have to build trust in Scotland as a great country, and we have to reset our welcome. And I'm absolutely clear about that. The Scots are incredibly welcoming, but of course social media will amplify it when they're not being so. And that discourages people who are coming on holiday to have an easy time, I think. So when I look across all of that, I did a bit of a pestle analysis, the politics, the economics, the social, the legal and ethical, that's all in the mix as well, isn't it? The environmental, all those pieces are in there. It's very, very complicated. At the bottom of it, though, seems to be the biggest changes, apart from the economics, are obviously the healthcare, the second part of this balancing act, and third, the cultural and sociological changes that we're all going through, which may turn out ultimately to be quite modest. They may ultimately, of course, turn out to be seismic. There may be some really big shifts in our society. People got used to living with their own families again, which is a bit of a novel item. You know, I've had my 2 grown-up children staying with us for the last 4 months. I've seen more of them in 115 days than I've probably seen in 20 years, which has been a complete pleasure, actually. It's put me in my place, certainly. My opinions are less valued, I suspect, than they were 4 months ago. But what a lovely thing to have happen. I'm very conscious of my local community. But then outside the community, there is an area where we're not so easy. We're looking cautiously at returns to work, looking at public transport, looking at the way other people are interacting to us. So I think everyone has become more cautious, and I think that's a function of age too. Young people inevitably will pick up the torch and run. As you get older, you become more cautious. And those that are used to doing staycations and so forth tend to be older. And I think that is something that's going to be a challenge for us and for Visit Scotland. How do we persuade that older audience to build that confidence and to start travelling, to start spending money, start going out, when their inclination is to buy their masks and buy their gloves and remain firm and safe at home, looking after that older relations. So there will be a reluctance, I think, to move, and that is a really big challenge. Of course, the virtual world has become very interesting. We're all sitting now all day on Zoom, Teams, and everything else. And that, again, is going to bring its own frictions. Employment law has not necessarily caught up with, you know, what it is if you're skiving at home rather than working at home. And I think that's going to be ahead for us. But I think with all of that, I'm quite struck by how our various institutions have worked really incredibly to bring order out of this chaos. And, you know, it's very easy, I say, to sort of agree with some of the howling noises on the news or on social media, but it's another thing entirely to close with the complexities that we're faced with now. And I do think about those in decision-making positions a great deal, whether they be in Scotland or wider. So that sort of brings us down to Malcolm's enormous responsibilities, specifically to restart tourism. And we can't have anybody, frankly, more expert. I've looked up to Malcolm my entire time in Scotland. He and his agency look after all of us just staggeringly well. And if you need any example of that, you know, the videos went up yesterday and the day before are just an example of what Scotland has to offer. And you, Alison, talked about, you know, what Dundee and Angus have to offer. What a treat. So I think it's probably enough time for me to sort of stop rabbiting and hand to a proper expert. Malcolm.
David, thank you very much indeed, and welcome everybody in a slightly brighter day for all. I have to admit, 17 weeks ago, when Visit Scotland overnight went into lockdown, it was a pretty long, dark tunnel with no light shining at the end of it, I'm afraid. Although, just going back to some of what David was saying, I think psychologically you could see an uplift when some of the dates began to emerge in terms of opening. And that certainly gives people something to aim at. It's very, very difficult when you're working literally in the dark and you don't know what you're working towards or when you're working towards something actually being realised. But when a date is there, then you can really focus in on it. And I was saying a little bit earlier, we did actually have the luxury of having time to plan, which is very often not the case because it's quite a fast-moving industry. I'll just give you a little snippet of how Visit Scotland has reacted to the COVID crisis. We obviously followed the pathway as laid out by the Scottish Government, which, if you remember, are the 4 phases, starting at respond, going into reset, restart, and then obviously the final piece being recovery. And as an organisation, we focused in on 7 areas, and this is all about trying to put some structure and around our response, so that again the organisation could orientate its abilities and its skill sets into delivering against these 7 areas. So the first one, quite clearly, was about marketing, and why would you want to carry on marketing when you're in lockdown? Well, because it was all about staying in touch with our partners, with our international partners, with the airlines that are so important. Alison mentioned about international travel. It will come, so we want to be in pole position for when they start up again, as some of them already are doing, now that we know where the air bridges are. But it was also about making sure that the consumer sentiment remains strong. And what people forget, and perhaps has got lost, understandably so, with this particular crisis, is that we were coming off 2019, which actually was a record year in terms of overnight expenditure. So it was about 5.8 billion overnight expenditure. Plus, if you add in the day trip market, it would take us to over £12 billion. That's the value to the Scottish economy. And of course, that momentum had to be maintained, because we always took the view that it would open up again at some point. Obviously, we never knew when or just how long it was going to take. But we wanted to make sure that utilising the channels that we have, particularly the social channels, we developed 4 phases. So first of all, it was very much about stay home, dream now, travel later. And some of the videos that you might have seen on social media, etc., was all about absence makes the heart grow fonder. And it was that kind of motive appeal to people to, not forget about Scotland and the fact that you'd be welcome when finally you're able to travel. The second phase of the marketing activity was very much about stay local and support your local communities. So again, it was mentioned about local producers doing particularly well, and that's something that we would encourage anyway. It's part of the overall experience that people expect and enjoy when they do come to Scotland. And then just recently, it was about travel local. So again, it's about supporting your local industry, rediscover where you live, rediscover the area around you, and then ultimately, rediscover the whole country. And now where we're at, of course, is welcome back for most, and I'll come to 1 or 2 areas which aren't open yet, obviously. But it's about knowing, before you go, because not everywhere is open, and we don't want people to travel unwittingly to somewhere to see something that's not open yet. So we've been working very closely with the overall industry to make sure that all the various websites that the areas have, and also on visitscotland.com, has the latest information available so that we don't disappoint anyone. The second area that we pivoted into was business advice and signposting. So what we had to try and do was understand the scale of the issues facing the industry, and the magnitude of it was enormous. I mean, some of the numbers David's quoted there, about 400 billion, doesn't surprise me, actually. Just looking at, businesses overnight shutting down, and potentially the thousands of people who, after furlough, could well, be made unemployed. And that's where I think the governments did their best to try financially to support businesses. But when you move at a pace like they tried to move at, you make mistakes. And there are cracks, and people fall through the cracks. And it's only when you turn back and you say, right, well, that didn't quite work for everybody, that you're able to go back and try and sort it. And certainly from the tourism perspective, what we found is that a lot of businesses fell between the cracks. It's such a fragmented industry. So there's no one size fits all. So we kept having to go back, take the information, guide people through the process of applying for funding, which wasn't always as straightforward as we would like it to have been. But I'm glad to say that, you know, somewhere in the region of over £200 million was put back into the industry, and in a small ways we were able to waive, for example, the quality assurance costs for business, just to try and alleviate some of the pressure that these businesses were facing, given that they had absolutely no revenue coming in, and they still had overheads that they had to manage. That has now moved on. So we brought out a mark in conjunction with the devolved agencies across the UK called Good to Go. And that is basically taking all the guidelines and the protocols in terms of health and safety. So businesses can go online, they can sign up to that, and they're able to use this mark as part of their own marketing collateral. And that comes back to the point that David made about reassurance and trust. So that anyone who's looking to book somewhere, if they see this mark, they know that the business in question has gone through the process of deep cleaning, etc., and adheres to the various guidelines that were brought together. And that, to date, I think we're sitting on just over 5,000 businesses across Scotland who've signed up to that. So still a bit to do yet, but I think given it's only been about 10 days, it's a pretty good start. The that we got into was we reconvened what's called the Scottish Tourism Emergency Response Group. Now, I'm old enough to remember foot and mouth and 9/11, which was the year I started in tourism, so a bit of a baptism of fire, I'm afraid. And we convened this emergency response group in 2001, and ever since we've had it when we had avian flu, when we had the volcanic ash crisis, and various acts of terrorism in London, Glasgow, etc. And so it came together quite quickly. Basically, it's made up of the enterprise agencies, the Scottish Tourism Alliance, Visit Scotland, and the Scottish Government, and also local authorities. And it's to make sure that there's an exit plan that doesn't have duplication, overlap, and people bumping into each other in corridors saying, well, I didn't realise you were meant to be doing this, or why are you here? So it's actually a cohesive plan for the public sector to be able to respond through the various phases. It's all published, it's available. You can go on to visitscotland.org, little plug for our corporate site, and you can see the full plan, and it's updated on a weekly basis. So all the latest activity that took place yesterday, for example, will also be on that site. That then led to the task force, which was announced by the Cabinet Secretary, Fergus Ewing, a couple of weeks back. It's met twice in 2 plenary sessions, and there's some work streams, the 3 work streams in play at the moment. One is about stimulating demand. Second one is about recovery. How do we help businesses get on their feet? And the third one, actually, which I think is really interesting, is the investment strategy going forward. And it's looking at the relationship between public sector, private sector investment. And again, going back to what David alluded to, it may well be that coming out of this, there is a greater understanding, awareness and relationship between the public and private sectors, and what's required in terms of investment going forward, which could be really quite exciting if we get it right. The other area that we had, which we use anyway, have ongoing, is our research team and insights team. We're doing the horizon scanning, because obviously we weren't first into this crisis, so we were able to look at what other markets had been doing, how they'd responded, bring that back, the information, and feed that back into government. But we were also following community sentiment, and again that goes back to this nervousness that we talk about, and communities wanting to be part of the solution, not have it done to them. And I think that's been a key learning, that at the heart of everything are communities. But we're also able to look at business sentiment, from the depths of depression to slight hope, to actually some real positivity coming through now, which is great. And also consumer sentiment. So we were able to follow what around the world were people saying about Scotland, thinking about Scotland, had their attitudes changed, and also in terms of travel. And in terms of travel, actually, what you do find, and this is the same right across the whole world, people stay close to home, their confidence grows, they travel a little bit further, their confidence grows, they then start to use public transport, their confidence grows, they then move into flying. So that there is a definite sequence of events that build up confidence for people. But it's time. It's time, and it's having that experience. So if you have a good experience, as David says, you start to then get a little bit bolder, and then you move to the next step. And that's the process that we're actually going to go through. And then finally, not finally, obviously we have an organisation, 650 people, so we had to make sure that they were all working from home safely, had the equipment, etc., that they required. Alison, you mentioned about the mental health. That's something that we've been keeping a very close eye on. In fact, actually, we have signed up with a programme called Headspace. Don't know if you've heard about that, which is very good. And a lot of innovative things have been coming through the teams working together. Technology has really come to the fore. People who perhaps would have run a mile from doing a Zoom webinar are now embracing it fully, Teams, Skype, you name it. So it'll be, I think from our perspective, it'll be quite interesting to see what the dynamic is going forward in terms of those who might want to work less from an office environment and more from a home environment. Those who won't want to work at all in an office environment, and those who can't wait to get out of the house. So I think there's a real kind of mix of emotions, and that's partly what's driving it, but also practicality. We certainly don't have to be all in one office in one place to be able to do the jobs that we're tasked with doing. And I think that's been quite a big learning for my organisation. And certainly going forward, we'll have a look at what the implications of that could be for Visit Scotland. The final group is one that's probably close to David's heart. What we realised very quickly is that the events industry has no single overarching body that speaks for it at a national level. There are various groups like Festivals Edinburgh, which are very focused in on the festivals in that area, but there's no national body. So through Events Director and particularly through Events Scotland, we tasked them to come up with evidence to show ministers just how devastated that particular sector was. And the research results have just been published on visitscotland.org, and they're absolutely shocking, particularly because the supply chain is made up of micro businesses, many micro businesses. And if I told you Hogmanay alone has 500 local suppliers, and there is, so if you think about the impact on those businesses, it's massive, and also in terms of employment. So we pulled together the Events Industry Advisory Group. I was very keen that it wasn't seen as a Visit Scotland body. It really had to be owned by the events industry to have the credibility within the industry. And that's been led by Peter Duffy, who is the Chief Executive of the SEC in Glasgow, and a very experienced operator, because we're also talking about business events, not just sporting and cultural events. So it's important that we get all of that together. And the good news there is that they've been having dialogue with the Cabinet Secretaries over the last couple of weeks, and we're seeing some real progress in that particular area. So that's really where Visit Scotland came from. That was our response. Obviously, a couple of weeks back, self-catering and other self-contained providers were able to open up, and I think it would be fair to say that the demand has been pretty strong, particularly if you're trying to find somewhere in the next couple of weeks or so. And the response has been very, very good. One of the issues, of course, that you have when you have a phased reopening is that not everything falls into place in a sequential way. So that's why we're seeing some issues around litter, also informal camping. So some pretty horrendous scenes at Loch Lomond and around the country. Had a meeting up in Arsig and Morar, with the beaches up there, which are stunning and spectacular, sadly soiled. So, you know, if you don't get the basics right at the beginning, then, you know, you're inviting problems. And so we ended up, of course, with local authority toilets not being open. The car parking facilities weren't open. Access was an issue. So those were issues that could have been avoided, but we are where we are, and certainly looking forward now to trying to get some clarity around the timeline for the events. Clearly there's some issues there about, you know, the size of meetings that are going to be allowed, and I suspect that's actually going to be in a relatively cautious way. It will start small and then eventually it will begin to build up. So over to you, Alison.
Great, thank you. So what we don't have is that awkward moment where there's no questions and I'm desperately filling. So that's good. We've got a few questions from Facebook and a couple of questions on the actual webinar chat. So I'm going to start with one from Jennifer McGregor, who's asking about coach tour clients, actually. And she's saying that, you know, she knows how important those affordable holidays were for older and less physically able people. And I guess similar to the impact on cruises. She's asking, are coach tours really economically important to Scottish tourism? She believes they're very important. And what might fill the gap left by coach tours, or when and how they might be recommencing. So Malcolm, got some thoughts on that perhaps? And maybe David wants to chip in if he wants to add.
Well, you saw the impact on shearings, you know, when they had to close, and I think the issue around coach tours is at particular parts or particular times of the year they're very important because they bring volume and they keep businesses, you know, ticking over. The difficulty that they clearly have. Well, they're manifold. I mean, one is obviously social distancing, so there's a bit of clarity around that. And I think some of the coach tour operators are getting their head around what, you know, socially distanced means. You know, facilities on the coaches, you know, so if you've got toilets and people are using them, so, you know, again, I would imagine the whole transport side, you know, trains will be just the same, you know, so they'll be able to learn from each other in terms of what best practice will look like. But it's also, again, because they do tend to be a slightly older age profile. So again, it's about how, you know, sort of confident are they in terms of getting on a bus with up to 60 people, something like that. So I think the coach industry, we have regular meetings with them, and I know they are trying to address these particular issues, but I haven't seen any solutions. But I do hope that we can help them get to that solution, whatever that solution may be, as soon as possible.
Thank you. And David, I mean, you're obviously still going to tell us about events and the massive impact on that, but coaches and coach tours actually often come specifically for something like that. It's like an anchor institution type.
They do, and Malcolm's talked about the events and festivals ecosystem, and I think this is perhaps the most important part of this. you know, the Tattoo, we always used to be very proud. In fact, we were a reason for travel. Because our tickets were rare, there were never enough tickets to go round. Someone abroad or even in Britain would buy a ticket to the Tattoo, then they'd worry about how they were going to get there, where they were going to stay, what else they were going to do, and then go outwards from Edinburgh. And we were really conscious of our very honoured and proud place in the reef system, because it is a reef system, Scottish tourism. It's extraordinary. There's one or two, you know, very large fish that swim about, but there are many, many, many smaller fish that live in the system, and the coach companies are part of this. And I think that the thing that's most striking for me, and I know the Tattoo are doing a piece of work on this, is to understand that the impact down the supply chains. Because as Malcolm has said, the work that's been done by VisitScotland has uncovered some profound damage to that chain. And I think when the lid comes off events and we're allowed to restart, it will only be then that we will start to uncover the gaps in supply chains, which in many cases have been in place for tens of years. You know, coach companies are often run by families that will go over 2 generations. So there's some very long-standing businesses which will have been damaged. My audience at the Tattoo used to be of a very particular demographic. We used to have hundreds of coaches would come in each evening from accommodation as far out as Ayr and right on the border with England, because the accommodation wasn't close enough to Edinburgh or wasn't cost effective. So we relied very heavily on the coaches. But I think the real challenge for Scottish tourism generally is re-establishing itself as a reason for travel. It comes right back to those points we were both making earlier. What is the incentive for somebody to come out of their house in Wiltshire or Kent or Herefordshire or Birmingham or Manchester or Sheffield and actually make the journey to some? I think the events and festivals have a very important part to play in that, because they give a single point that people go, I really want to go to that, I'll travel to that. And then the value then spreads out. Well, I've got to stay in a hotel, I've got to have a fish supper, I want to have a beer before the show, and perhaps I might go and have a spa at a lovely Highland hotel, you know, the day after before I return to wherever it is. So all of that recovery becomes really important. And the challenge for events is that their lead time for planning is really quite long. So if you run a hotel, providing you've got your staff, you've got your infrastructure, you've had a delivery of food, you can actually open and start running really quite quickly. The events sector and the festivals, they each have to bring their acts in, they have to plan the accommodation, and there is a finite amount of time necessary to do that. Our cancellation, we took the decision to cancel it to this year in mid-March, because we thought there was a probability that we would have invested too much by the end of April for it to have been economically viable. And that's a really tough thing. Tattoo plans 2, 3, 4, even 5 years out for something. And what we need desperately now is the date. Now, of course, those certainties are not available because the virus is being biological, it's being unpredictable. And it's terribly difficult for government to give an equivocal date. And I suspect one of the challenges in all of our industries is we're going to have to go from no growth at all, from all stop, to a percentage growth next year. I think most of this year is really tough. And I think people are going to be really struggling to make, you know, even percentages of their budgeted revenues. I think there will be a decent return next year, but I don't think we've got much prospect of returning to sort of previous growth or GDP levels much before the year ending in 2022. I think that's a really tough thing. So I think for all of us, and this is not always the nature of business, people do not tend to do long-term planning. The more edgy a business, the more hanging on by its fingernails financially, the less people will tend to plan ahead. And I would really counsel that everybody tries to look at the big picture, understand where they fit into the big picture, and then plan for strategic conditions to improve. How do they fit into Malcolm's plan and the Scottish plan? How do they fit into the UK plan as well? Because Scotland, like it or not, is economically tied in terms of tourism to England. That's such an important link. And then to narrow in on their region and their actual business. But people have got to understand how they fit into the big picture, how they contribute to it, and how it contributes to them. And that's going to require an increase in conceptual thinking. It's going to require some physical assistance for businesses, and it's going to require different sorts of leadership and management to get people to think ahead, to think long term. That's really difficult because it's out of everybody's comfort zone. Most people can run a business if it's the same every year because you learn something you implement it the next year. Going from a standing start to what is going to need to be double-digit growth month on month to get us back to where we were at the end of 2019 is, I think, a really big challenge for us. And it's going to require some great leadership at the lowest levels and at the very highest levels. And there's nobody who should opt out of this. The business community has got such powerful leaders at all levels. The business community has got a really strong part to play, and you as the chamber and so forth, supporting government, pointing out to government where they have got cracks. And as Malcolm said, when you're planning in crisis, you will make mistakes. You will only ever get an 80% answer. The great trick is to try and get an 80% answer quite quickly. But business has got such a powerful place and thing to play in this. There's some great brains, some great leaders in business. And I think that it's this whole ship effort that I think is so important. If that gets right, the small fish and the big fish will all return to some sort of harmony within the next 2 to 3 years. But it's going to take everybody working to do that.
So that's a bit of a challenge to us all. I quite like that. Thank you, David. I mean, I've got, this is not a question from the floor. We've got a couple of questions from attendees, but I'm interested in digital and how that can help recovery, and particularly in the sector. So I guess events is very face-to-face, and the tourism industry actually relies in most part on people going to something, and those that can communicate that message about safety, for example, or that can take their events, and you can only do this with small scale. You know, we've taken our event program online, and a number of people are kind of doing things like that. But are we already set up for a digital divide? So I think we've sort of had a little bit of one before, and maybe been slightly kind. And I worry, am I right to think that that gap could widen? Because is it going to be difficult for some businesses to adopt digital technologies? And is the infrastructure just not there in some parts of the world to let businesses tell their story about the safety measures that they've put in place, and the fact that they're, you know, good to go and get themselves open and tell the world that they actually exist? So is that a challenge you see? How do we actually maybe get some of that solved?
Yeah. It's a great question, Matt. And you'd expect me to take a view on events because a Marshall amplifier gives an analog sound. It's a beautiful rounded sound which comes from valves. A digital amplifier does not give the same sound. It's not as rounded. It's not as rich. I think some of the challenges you mentioned there are very important. There's no doubt that many people in the world do not have access to some of the digital technologies. But what I am very convinced by is that the connectivity of our world is really quite good. So if you want to hear something on the steppe in Mongolia about something that is happening in New York, you can, for the most part, find out. All the world has televisions. Most of the world has phones. Huge proportions of people have smartphones now. And where there is a gap between the smartphone and the person who is interested in a particular topic, I think the word travels by word of mouth, and I think it does it extremely effectively. In all of that, though, there is this absolutely imperative thing that however you communicate, and we've all got hundreds of channels now. I think the Tattoo had something like 230 channels that they communicate on. I mean, it's absolutely eye-watering. But whatever you do, you have to have a unitary message. The message cannot be confused for the customer, because then they just introduce different elements into it. And at the moment, bless all our governments, there is a difference, there's a diverse message between the four nations, and there are sometimes diverse messages within a single government. Now, I very much appreciate how difficult that is to get right, because even trying to communicate out of a simple business is complex in the modern world. But people have got to place a much greater emphasis on clear storytelling in all of this. And Scotland's got a particular challenge because of some of the constitutional challenges at the moment. There is a divergence, there is unease. And as you know, I presently, I live in Wiltshire, and I listen to what people in Wiltshire say about Scotland. And I feel that confusion on the high street here. It's a really tough gig, this, but we've got to have unity of purpose, unity of message, and then absolutely live the word. We say we're going to welcome everybody to Scotland. They're going to have an amazing time, and the food's great, the destination's wonderful, and the sky's blue. Then we absolutely need to live that. What we can't do is sell a story and then in another part of the enchanted forest somehow compromise it. So this is everybody's game, I think. This is the taxi driver who picks you up at the coach station, it's the hotel owner, it's the B&B, it's the cafe owner, it's the person who sells you the pizza, and it's the attractions and the events. All have got to be on a single message, and that, is Malcolm's huge challenge with his team.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add to that is it's not a competition. So what we actually have to do is make sure that we are collaborating, that we are aligned, which doesn't mean that we block out individuality. But what it just goes back to what David's saying, is that the core message has to be straightforward, it has to be simple. If you think about the messaging at the beginning of the crisis, it was very, very clear. And it was very much about staying at home, staying safe, protect the NHS. And that came through every day, every news bulletin, every speech that was given, the backdrop that was there. And that's why there is this level of nervousness, because it was so successful. So now what we're trying to do is slightly unpick that. But that, by saying it is safe if you do the right things, and you can travel and you can get to various places, etc. So that will take time, but it will also take consistency, and we need to make sure that just as much as Visit Scotland is doing this, everyone else is doing it, but also my colleagues in England and in Wales and in Northern Ireland are doing likewise.
Great. Okay. Well, I am conscious of time, and I think, we have had a few other comments and things, but I think I'm probably going to wrap us up, because we said we would try and not take too much more than an hour of people's time. I guess just to finish off, I mean, I think David said, perhaps maybe before a lot of people were on this call, the work that the industry's been doing with Visit Scotland and using social media and others to kind of share their stories and kind of tell everybody they're open is just really powerful. So if you do, I'm going to ask you to do two things maybe. One thing is go and find those videos and share them, because they are really powerful, and use your kind of channels to tell those same stories. Also, I have personally seen on a lot of my social media connections the Good to Go scheme, and I think that's very powerful, because it's a recognised industry standard, and it's not just virtual. We've seen businesses talk about displaying that in their premises and other things. So pass that on to as many people as you possibly can, and let everybody know that we are open for business. And I think continuing just to put the right measures in place is a big challenge for every single business at the moment, but the more that we can instill confidence, the more we can get out and safely feel like we can now be part of kind of helping make the tills ring. That's really important to help and get our economy going. So massive thank you to both of our speakers, David and to Malcolm, to Shireen for coming on and telling us about Al-Maktoum, to Sarah and the Chamber team for all the hard work in getting our event going today. Thank you for attending. If you've watched on Facebook, if you're watching us when we put this up on the YouTube channel and you're coming back to have another look, or if you attended in person and took part in kind of chipping into that conversation. Hugely appreciate your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week, and get out and support the sector. Thank you very much. Thanks.